have some familiarity with story maps. Wow, okay, that's great, that's exciting. How many of you actually made a story map? That's pretty good too. So I'll give you some basics and hopefully leave some time for some questions. So what I'm going to do is give just kind of a summary of what story maps are all about, and then show you quite a few. Pending, of course, we're kind of dependent on the wireless here, so they may or may not perform as well as I'd like. At any rate, I've been with Esri almost 5 years now. Came to Esri after 27 years at National Geographic, and I've been just having a wonderful time developing these tools. We've assembled a small team early on and did a lot of thinking about what storytelling and what mapping is all about. And of course, stories, and here I'm talking about stories in terms of, it's nonfiction stories. So if we experience something, of course, our experiences have all sorts of detail and can be kind of chaotic and things, but when you're recounting an event, you tend to simplify complex phenomena, not falsify for the most part, although our memories are flawed, but to try to sort of distill an experience into a story, and it's really the basic way we communicate. So that's obviously what storytelling is all about, but mapping has some interesting similarities. So mapping is taking a very complex and sometimes chaotic world and simplifying it and modeling it, and it's kind of editing out the unnecessary stuff to reveal patterns and interrelationships and things. And so maps are a visual way of communicating that we feel is very similar to that sort of very human process of storytelling. So there's a really, really deep allegiance between these two, and it's been fun to spend a half a decade now really exploring that and developing these story maps. So what is a story map? They are simple web apps that combine interactive maps, most of them published on Esri's ArcGIS Online resource, with multimedia content, photos, videos, text, sometimes audio, and user experiences, and that's sort of the essence of what our apps are all about, to tell all sorts of stories about the world. And by world, I mean, of course, everything from global down to a neighborhood level. They're hosted by Esri in the cloud, so you don't have to worry about maintaining your own servers and things, but you can, if you do have your own infrastructure, and especially if you want to customize our story maps, you can opt to host them yourselves. This is really key to me because I am not a technical person. They incorporate builder functions so that you can build quite sophisticated multimedia presentations with interactive maps and everything, with little or no GIS or web development skills. And I can say that, I can personally attest to that because I'm relatively clueless about web development and the mechanics of GIS, and I've done a lot of story maps. Most story maps work equally well on all sorts of screen sizes, and we continue to work to improve them on that front so that you can enjoy them on your cell phone and on a giant screen like this and everything in between. And story maps are open source. So obviously Esri's ArcGIS on ArcGIS software is not open source, but our apps, these little JavaScript web apps, are totally open source, so you're welcome to download them and customize them. In fact, we'd like to see more of that. They're available on GitHub. If you are a developer type or have colleagues who are, you can download the source code and have at it. We include an array of apps that provide different ways of interacting with maps. And I'll get into that very momentarily. So early on in our tenure, what we would do is would be to assign ourselves a story, sometimes just on our own, sometimes in partnership with an organization like a nonprofit or a federal agency, or you name it, and then develop, just take that story by itself, develop a user experience that kind of supported it, and then those user experiences that either resonated with us or with our audience or both, we would then take and develop into these apps, because those were the experiences we thought, well, gee, it worked for this story, but it's the kind of user experience that lots of other people could kind of pour their own content into. So that's really how we develop this array of apps. So, the stories include things like comparing two maps or presenting a series of maps or place-based narratives, et cetera. So we have taken those, not all of them by any means, and developed them into this modest array of apps with more to come. And if all goes well, I will preview a couple of additional ones that are coming. So I'm gonna list the main apps that we have, and then go on to show you some, hopefully an example of each one. So our most popular apps, the two most popular ones, present these sequential place-based narratives. Story Map Tour, which is the simplest in a lot of ways, takes a series of geotagged photos and videos and presents them in the context of an interactive map. This and our other user experiences are designed to be kind of navigated in a sort of default way, but we present them in a way that we also give users the option to sort of hijack a narrative and wander around in the material. Story Map Journal also is a sequential narrative, but it accommodates longer form text and a richer mix of multimedia content, including being able to present one or multiple web maps with different kinds of layers and themes and things. Then we have two ways, probably a third or fourth coming in a year or so, of comparing two maps. One is using a Swype tool, and one is a Spyglass tool. And actually, they're the same app, and within this builder function for it, you can choose between the two options. Again, I'll show you in a few minutes. Then you can compare several maps with what we call Story Map Series, and it has 3 different layout options. So again, the concept is essentially identical. It's just the user experience is altered a little bit depending on and you can go back and forth among them in the builder function and decide which one works best for your story. So one presents a series of maps with a series of tabs. And by the way, I say a series of maps, but this and Map Journal have what we call a main stage that usually accommodates a map, but you can also put in there a still photo or a video or a website, so they can become pretty rich multimedia narratives as well. And then Side Accordion does the same sort of series presentation, but it's got this side panel, and if you click, as a little animation shows, on one of them, that part of the panel expands to show you the explanatory text. And then the third presents that series as that series of maps or images as a set of numbered bullets. Then there's displaying a curated set of points of interest. So, in other words, this is not intended to be a sequential narrative, but if you want to feature places to go in a city or a historic area or you name it, Story Map Shortlist does the job, and it's got a gallery of thumbnails, and as you pan and zoom around the map, those thumbnails refresh to show you just what's within the map extent, which is kind of cool. If say somebody is interested only in a particular neighborhood, they're not distracted by points of interest that are outside that neighborhood. And then coming early next year, and again, I think I'll be able to preview these for you. We've given the rapidly increasing popularity of our Story Map Journal, which has the scrolling side panel. We thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if the whole screen scrolled? So we're developing that into something we call Story Map Cascade, and that the whole it will be more immersive, kind of more like you see often from the New York Times and other big websites, that you'll be able to have this sort of full screen experience. And then we're also developing a kind of lightweight crowdsourcing app that I'm excited about. So the basic concept came from a conversation with the head of our education group, saying, who said, wouldn't it be cool if we could have an app that would enable a school teacher to send her kids out in the field and then post and share and see their observations in a relatively simple, easily configured form. And so we prototyped that, but designed it to be very scalable, so it could be as small in scale as a few kids in a classroom on a large-scale map of a neighborhood to something that could be nationwide or even global in scope. Before I go to these examples, I just wanted to point you to our website, storymaps.arcgis.com. This is just a screen grab of our homepage. We feature a monthly map. We did one recently that got quite a bit of attention that features the work of a professor at MIT who created the living wage calculator, showing the pretty egregious gap almost everywhere in the country between minimum wage and really a minimum cost of living, or what it would take, the kind of income it would take to have essentially a basic, decent living for an individual or a family. But we also have a rotating, a small gallery of featured stories and some basic information. Other key parts of the site include a gallery, a curated gallery of several hundred story maps that you can filter by subject area or the type of app. So if you're considering doing a story map and looking for ideas and inspiration, this is a great way to go. So we spend quite a bit of time reviewing story maps that have been published and featuring them in this gallery. And then we've the heart of our site is this page where we list these our apps and describe them. And each one of our apps, then you can link from here to a home page for the app that summarizes it, and it in turn links to step-by-step tutorials for how to build a story using that app, and filtered gallery views showing you lots of stories that have been produced using those apps. You can also go straight from those pages and this page into our builder functions. So right there you can see build a map tour, build a map journal. And so it's been really exciting to see the response and use of our apps. We're now numbering in the tens of thousands of story maps that have been produced by all sorts of organizations, from individuals to large organizations, lots and lots of nonprofits, some historical and cultural organizations. And by the way, the examples I'll show you are mostly chosen to be more or less appropriate to this audience. So we've gotten some nice compliments about the utility of our stories. And one quick aside, it's been exciting for me to do this because when I was in my tenure as chief cartographer at National Geographic, I became aware of this world of GIS and really admired the amazing work that was being done. But back then, this was in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was kind of amazed that so little of that amazing data had been made accessible, had been kind of emancipated from its enslaved state within organizations. And part of that process of emancipation is making that data understandable and accessible to people. So in other words, interpreting it, turning it into a story. And so I'd been saying that when I'd give talks and things in my former incarnation at National Geographic. And here I am getting a chance to put Esri's money where my mouth has been, and it's been really exciting to see GIS, to help GIS and its products and benefits become accessible to much broader audiences. So with that, I'm going to attempt to show you some live story maps. And again, let me get rid of my office reminders here. These may or may not perform terribly well depending on how the wireless treats me. But at any rate, this is a good example of map tour. So you can start with an overview. This is a historic walking tour of Bellingham, Washington. So you can just click through the narrative. This one happens to have audio, so it's been customized a bit to accommodate audio. So there's a narration that's incorporated into it. And things are moving kind of slowly. Give it a second here. This is, if the narrative doesn't cooperate with me, I can at least show you that you can click sequentially through the photos, and of course they can be videos as well, or you can explore on your own on the map. Here we go. so that it can be this sequential walking tour, but if somebody's interested in a particular place, they can just wander around on the map or use this carousel to be able to jump to a location that they're interested in. We're going to be working on a couple of alternate layouts to this. This, to me, is starting to feel a little bit kind of boxy and dated. I shouldn't, I guess, publicly criticize my own work, but we're working on 2 or 3 alternatives that we're pretty excited about that will kind of break out of this kind of boxy feel. Here's another example. This is one we produced for Smithsonian when we, in observance of the sesquicentennial of the assassination of Lincoln, and we used a historical map showing Washington in the period, and essentially told the tale, the kind of bizarre tale of John Wilkes Booth and his co-conspirators and their movements in and around Washington, and then later on their having fled to Virginia. I was struck by the look of these people. I mean, Central Casting could not have done a better job with some of these characters. I mean, look at that guy. It's pretty amazing. By the way, as you see this little switch to builder mode. Because I authored this map, I see it, but of course other people don't see it. But that allows me access to the builder function. So suddenly now I've got all this ability just to click to change titles, to drag and drop to reorganize the story. Since it's a public story, I don't think I'll mess with that. And do things like go into settings. We have various color schemes for the header and carousel that you can either choose sort of default settings or pick your own colors. You can get rid of the, God forbid, get rid of the Esri logo and add your own if you'd like. And you can also set the zoom level so that you can start with an overview, but then for the succeeding story tour points, you zoom in to see get a closer view. This is an example of map journal, and a really exciting example, actually. So obviously, story maps range from the kind of general and not maybe superficial isn't the right term, but just the kind of presenting the basics of a landscape or a neighborhood or a certain geography to something much more kind of sophisticated or scholarly. And this is an amazing effort by a group called Prologue DC to show the history of racially restrictive covenants in residential neighborhoods in Washington D.C. So they've done some very in-depth research, mapping house by house where covenants were, with specific examples of them. So really, really interesting stuff. But as you can see, as I scroll through the story, each section on the side panel is associated with an element on the main stage. And again, as I mentioned, that can be a map, a static image, a video, or a website. Again, apologies for things loading relatively slowly. But you can also not only program the narrative to be associated with a certain visual for each section, but even within a section, we have these things called map actions that can take you to a specific part of the map, or take you from the map to a different theme or a totally different, say, an image or you name it. So this has become an incredibly popular and very, very versatile storytelling platform. Here's another example about that huge explosion that happened that destroyed much of central Halifax, Nova Scotia, when I guess a shipborne munitions dump essentially exploded, almost atomic level of destruction. So a really interesting narrative using historical photographs, a map that's been nicely customized, probably on our GIS desktop and published as a web map, and audio recordings as well to add to the narrative.
We had to stop on the examining grounds at the...
So you get the idea. It can get to be a pretty immersive it's the voice of God there. I wasn't quite expecting. At any rate, on a much more kind of lightweight level than that is this story map Swype and Spyglass. So here's a nice example of Swype, the Wellington College in the United Kingdom, as seen in satellite imagery and in a historical map. So it's really fun to be able to compare, of course, what's there today versus what was there back when the map. This is 1940, I think, map. It says showing air raid precautions. So this then and now stuff people really love. We found that this Swype is actually more useful than Spyglass because you get a large area for both. You can kind of instantly go back and forth. But people absolutely love the Spyglass thing. There's something kind of voyeuristic about it, I guess. But this we did a series for Smithsonian for a half dozen U.S. cities, comparing satellite imagery of today with historical maps from the David Rumsey collection that had been georeferenced. And so this is 1851, back when the area where the Lincoln Memorial was essentially a tidal marsh or mudflat, and the canal that the sort of malarial, mosquito-ridden canals and things that Lincoln liked to flee up to that his summer home up not too far from Catholic University. So these are really engaging ways to kind of expose people to history and context. This is on a very different topic. We did a thing on the world of cheese for Smithsonian. This is Story Map series, and this is the tabbed view. So we just did some research and gathered a sort of collection of cheeses that you could enjoy without actually. We haven't conquered the smell and taste part of the multimedia yet, but you get the idea. And then compare that to maps of cheese production by country and cheese consumption by country. And so this is combining, of course, our own app with the things you can do on ArcGIS Online. So we create these maps on ArcGIS Online. I can use, we developed a spreadsheet of these figures, drag and drop them on the map to create these graduated circle maps, then publish them into our story maps. This is an example of the side accordion map that has been customized to, I guess, resemble sort of wine colors, because this is a map of viticulture in Europe. Again, pretty sophisticated level of effort, with lots and lots of points I guess, designating specific wineries and describing them, and kind of zooming in on areas of interest. So that's side accordion, and this again is map series still, but this is the bulleted viewpoint. This is a story I did just for fun on cathedrals, Gothic cathedrals around Europe and some in the U.S., and of course one very close to home here, the National Cathedral in Washington. Then we've got, this is Shortlist. So as I mentioned, Shortlist is a non-linear way of presenting a set of points of interest. And it can be customized so that you can separate your points of interest into themes. And so this is historic landmark locations in Deschutes County, Oregon, near Bend, Oregon. And so you can go click among structures, places, and sites. And as I mentioned, you can pan and zoom on the map, sometimes zoom so far that you're almost without any sites. But as you can see, as I pan around the map, this gallery of thumbnails updates according to my map extent. And then I can click either on a map icon or on a thumbnail to access additional information, which can in turn send people to websites and things. On to a couple of a preview of coming attractions. This we've had in prototype form for close to a year, but over the next few months we'll be making this available as a configurable app. So the idea is to make crowdsourcing easy for non-technical people. So this is one of the first ones we did for a couple of undergraduates in Oregon who just wanted to encourage their cohort to get out into nature, so they invited people to share some of their favorite outdoor destinations. And so, like the Shortlist, you can click on a thumbnail gallery and click on map icons to discover things. Similarly, the thumbnail gallery updates according to your map extent. We have icon clustering so that as you zoom in, these clustered icons disaggregate individual icons. And these represent the full submissions. But then if you want to participate, you just click this. Sorry about my office reminders here. And you can fill out a form right here on the site. I'm already signed in, so if I wasn't signed in, it would have invited me to sign in via my social media account, Facebook or Google Plus or Twitter, or just go straight to the app itself, fill out this form. I can pick a picture. If I were out in the field with my cell phone, I could access this as well, take a picture with my cell phone, add the description and title and location information, accept the terms and conditions, click save, and it's more or less instantly added to the map. So the idea going forward is that people will be able to go online and author their own. So that means you'd be able to configure that little title panel with your own picture and text, but you could be able to also kind of drag and drop fields to configure the form, change the wording of the form, make decisions about things like whether you want to allow submissions to appear right away or to be reviewed before they appear, things like that. So we're really excited about this. We've already had implementations done, sort of custom done, because that means we have to sort of hand do them, which will change in the future. But we've done one for the White House for a Maker Faire event they had. And that one and a few others have used an additional function of this app, which is that it can be programmed to represent or to recognize specific hashtags. So once you launch it, and the White House, for instance, put out the word about hashtag WH Science Fair. So anybody who tweets using that hashtag, whose tweet includes that hashtag and some location information and a photo, automatically appears on the map. So some of these instances have used that and primarily map those tweets. Others are primarily these submissions that are specific to the app itself. This is the Cascade, an early prototype of the Cascade app that I mentioned that will include full screen scroll. Full screen scroll can be a tongue twister. But in this case, we featured the saga of the Elwha River, which on which two dams used to almost completely restrict the migration of salmon. So we thought it was an ideal topic to a story to tell. So that this app will enable people to use essentially choose different types of pages, whether it's a full screen video clip like you just saw, or pages that include text and still photographs. It will accommodate, as our map journal does already, it will accommodate 3D maps. So you can, as you scroll, this map zooms in on the Elwha River watershed and then locates the dams. The dams aren't showing up quite yet. At any rate, you get the idea. Back to a more conventional scroll type narrative with text, and then you can use it for a kind of before and after. So this shows the one of the impoundments before the dam was removed and immediately after the dam was removed. And we go on to talk about what happened post-removal, and then you can actually see maps representing the amazingly rapid return of salmon to the watershed and where each species goes within the Elwha River and its branches. So that, again, both of these apps will be, if all goes well, will be launched in in February or March of next year in initial versions. And then we're also experimenting with 3D. We've been hoping and continue to hope and plan that we'll feature some of the amazing work that's been done here at Mount Vernon in a 3D context, but this is an early experiment. So as I mentioned, 3D scenes can already be incorporated into our map journal, but we want to create user experiences that are more integral to the 3D mapping experience. So we worked with some scientists who had tracked a golden eagle as an experiment, and this is still kind of an experimental stage, but showing the track of this eagle from the Canadian Rockies down to New Mexico. So you can click individually, essentially day to day, to see how the eagle moved, or you can just click a play pause button and just kind of sit back and watch the movement of the eagle from day to day, along with descriptions and pictures that change as the eagle is flying around. So this is a pretty good example of the kind of fun we're having. I say fun because I'm not a developer. I come up with these cool ideas, and then the developers have to do the coding. But I think they have fun too. So at any rate, that's my story. It's been incredibly gratifying to see the use these are being put to. I think we're still at the very beginning in terms of the potential number of uses and types of uses, and especially the sorts of organizations all of you represent. I think there's tremendous potential for use of our tools, and I hope to see more of your excellent work in story map form very soon. I'd be happy to answer questions if there's time.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and take a few questions now. Anybody has them?
Are there any limitations for, like, say, the cheese map and the point distribution? Is there a limitation of how much you can upload into the system for the online hosting?
Sometimes there are limitations if you don't have a full ArcGIS Online account. There can be, I've forgotten now exactly what the numbers are. I find that the limitations are more editorial than technical, and that if you present too dizzying an array of content, that can just overwhelm people. So we actually, we've actually had to stretch limits, not in terms of items on a map, but in terms of things like tour points in a map tour. We thought, well, nobody's going to want to do more than 99 points, so we restricted it to that. But then we got a lot of people saying we want 300 points, et cetera, which we advise against. We think less is usually more in this kind of context. But for the most part, no, there really aren't restrictions in numbers. Yes.
How tech savvy do you need to be to create pretty basic walking tour maps, photos?
How tech savvy?
Yes.
Well, that's our continuing quest to reduce, continue to reduce the tech savvy common denominator. So again, I'm familiar with GIS and know what it's about, but I'm not a GIS professional. I am not a developer, and I thoroughly enjoy building these maps. So we have incorporated these builder functions. I briefly showed you the builder function for Map Tour. Map Journal probably has the most refined of those builder functions at this point. So we've designed them very carefully so that you can kind of go in and rummage around and figure things out. We also have a series of tutorials. We have a blog that really shouldn't be called a blog. It's really more a kind of compendium of tips and tricks and best practices. We're continuing to try to lower the barrier in terms of, one challenge we have is that our more sophisticated apps like Map Journal kind of require people to go back and forth between our builder experience and the ArcGIS Online map viewer. We're working to bring those together so that right within the builder you can open up a map viewer so you can create and customize a web map and things. So it's right now you can do it without any JavaScript skills, without any GIS skills. It does require some degree of patience and fortitude, but we're working continually to lower that. So yeah, don't go out and get JavaScript training. You don't need it.
I've got a question right here. So probably the greatest source of media that I consume these days is podcasts more than print or anything on the web. I have there's a lot of podcasts I listen to, and I'm often frustrated with them because they're so non-multimedia. It's just you're just listening to this talking voice, and I think I'm wondering, is there any? Often it's maps that I want to see for a lot of the historical podcasts I listen to. Are there any applications you can think of where a podcast developer is kind of segueing into this story maps and including a podcast that would cover maps and have a map component of that while you're listening to the podcast?
That's interesting. That's a question I don't think I've encountered before. It's certainly possible. I don't know a whole lot about. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but you're right. It would be great for a lot of them to be able to essentially follow along on a map. There's no reason that the contents of a podcast couldn't be poured into a story map and presented in a more multimedia context. So that's probably the best way to approach it at this point.
Can one of these existing ones do a time slider, or can I put in a request that we could have a map and there's a time slider that's pulling up, like buildings were here and then they're not here, and then is there, or do you have one that can work in that way?
Well, not very well yet. Mea culpa. I mean, we've been talking about that for quite some time. I have mocked up several user experiences that incorporate time sliders. We have done several custom story maps in that sort of experimental context I was telling you about. One showing Civil War battlefields over time. You can find some of these on our gallery. Another showing the nuclear test ground, so you can see the nuclear test locations change over time. But we have not systematically tackled time sliders and chronology and temporal data in story map form, partly because it's complex. It's not easy, and there are several types of temporal data and several ways of experiencing it. So, if you're looking at a succession of discrete events or a choropleth style map that changes over time, et cetera. So it's, stay tuned, we'll get to it, but it's been longer than I had hoped, since it's taken us longer to tackle it than I would have liked. Especially for this group, I should be doing better with time.
Okay. We'll do one more question here, and then I think we'll break for lunch.
I've worked some with story maps and also with the web app builder, the kind of parallel function where you can add widgets, searches, and queries and things like that. And I think a lot of people would be interested in making the web app templates, the story maps, have the ability to add things like the widgets from the web app builder. Is there any movement towards that?
Not as much as we'd like. The web app builder effort started actually mostly in Esri's Beijing office, kind of in parallel to our effort halfway across the world. And by the time we attempted to kind of coordinate, we had gone down such different development paths that it was really, continues to be a real head scratcher how we can further kind of integrate those two. I've seen an increasing number of apps created with web app builders embedded in story maps, and that's one way to go, but it's less than ideal. So I don't have a very good answer for you there. We're going to continue. What we're working toward longer term for story maps is to be able to have widgets that you can add within story maps. So I showed you the slider and Spyglass. It would be nice to have a widget that would allow you kind of seamlessly and easily within, say, a map journal to add add something like that. But in terms of integrating Web App Builder and story maps, that's a ways off if it's going to happen at all, frankly.
Okay. Well,
All right.
thank you,
Thanks
Alan.
very much.